Okay, I'm glad to present you archetype JavaScript framework. It's a client-side web framework entirely in JavaScript. So we just released the 0.1.5 version this week, and I'll present you now. So why using JavaScript frameworks? On the left hand of the screen, you can see JavaScript without using any framework, and it's quite ugly, unreadable, and not very cross-browser. So on the right hand, you've got exactly the same functionality with using a prototype framework. We relies on prototype framework because it's very efficient. Okay, so we can do this with a lot of examples. They are all very complicated with raw JavaScript. So why having made a new framework? There are lots of Ajax framework. This diagram, uh, on this diagram, you can see exactly why. Prototype improves the language. It improves the navigator abstraction, and that's almost everything it did. But it's quite perfect. So Scriptaculous is another well-known framework which helps to do your own widgets, doing something sympathetic on your web page. Dojo gives a lot of widgets. It is very efficient in this manner, but we consider that widgets are pre-made, and you have to do your own work, and this easily, and you have to can reuse your work when you're changing a project and being agile. So archetype provides some good functionality. The first one is when you have a Hudge JavaScript code on your client side, you start to have a problem with JavaScript file loading, and we've got a total dependency management for JavaScript file and other files like HTML templates, CSS, etc., etc. We provide good tools to structurate your code with something we call the components. We'll see this in the next slide. An event communication between components, really easy to use, and an MVC model to be quite separated. We focus on readability and maintainability. So each language are split in their own files. On the ease of development, so we try to improve the syntax, the syntax, don't know, and simplify it as much as possible. We provide conventions over configuration style. So naturally, everything is easy, and if you need something that fits your needs exactly, you can configure it in the configuration file. So it's very flexible. Basically, we introduced new concepts in the language with a kind of superclass which is called component. So here's the structure of archetype. So as said before, we relies on prototype and a custom event library which was made and used notably on the Apple Store for the iPhone. quite efficient. We provide some good stuff for programming, like a logger, which is really important when you work in JavaScript. Dependency management, said before, on something I didn't speak about, which is template interpreter. We've got templates on the JavaScript side, no server involved here. This is really great on Lightning Fast. And something very special, which is a method builder, which provides services like AOP would do in Java, for example. So here's the typical JavaScript web page. You just have a title, and then you just insert the JavaScript tag for the library. There is nobody. I don't lie. You don't need anybody. You've got the template system loading. Archetype will load all the files needed. It just look at the location and load the controller for the page, and then the controller will launch everything necessary using the dependency system. So we've got configurable and transitive dependencies between files. You've got an example of how dependencies are made in a component. You just say dependencies. I need this component, this component, this component, these libraries, this CSS, and this template. It's really simple. It's really natural, and so. The development unit is really the component. We often use no more class. There are two kinds of components, the behavioral components and the graphical components. The graphical component is used as a widget with the JavaScript code and the loading of templates and the CSS file, like you can see here. Components don't need to know each other. It's the event system. You just launch an event. It's broadcasting to every component, and if it can, then it's been catched by all the components interested, and really easy to use, and provides a real split between layers, etc. Three languages to define a web interface: HTML, CSS, JavaScript for behavior. So we keep it separate as much as possible. This is the best practice. Archetype components encourages good practices. So you've seen. Unique mechanism in JavaScript. This is method builders. I've explained a bit. There is some examples here. The create date is a private function. Convention underscore private function. This function is empty. It's just fires an update event. You don't have to define it. Archetype will do this. And date update is a callback which will be called when a date update will be sent. It has not to be sent by this component particularly. Whoa. Kind of weird. So this is the structure of an application using archetype. There's some problem here, but don't know why. It's perfect on my PC. So here you've got static files, typically HTML templates, CSS files, JavaScript files. here you have your server application, and an Ajax interface will do the job to do the web remoting, and this is really a transport layer to do all you need, which is dynamic on the front side. So archetype core will load everything needed in static files. You can use libraries like Scriptacles, Dojo, whatever you want. And then you made your components, graphical components with which uses the model view controller system. The model is brought by the Ajax interface, and the controllers just see everything needed to do a real middle on your front side. So now I will see you a bit of an application with archetype. Typically, this presentation is made with archetype. So here is the page defined in the browser, and a little bit of code. Hope. Here's the page controller. It does almost nothing. Display. It does almost nothing, just loading a component. It tells archetype, launch me this component, and the archetype will do the rest. This is the container component. So the container is here. The container itself is a graphical component. So it extends archetype component, graphical components. You can do your own graphical components. It has a main template, which is rendered by default. You don't have to say it particularly. It's in the render function of the graphical component. So basically, when you have a really simple graphical component, you will just have to do your own stuff, not the generic things. Here, this is we're using a bit the logger. The logger would be available if I have Firebug in Firefox. It's a really good debugger, really good extension. Use it. So the logger tells what the controller does. I tell it when to render. The render function is not defined, it's defined in the graphical component. And it instantiates some of the other components needed, all the components needed to launch this presentation. It could have been made only with archetype require component from the page controller, but it was made like this, so it's another way. Here is some basic components. No graphic here. Its aim is just to handle the keyboard events and the click events. There are two little arrows to change slide, and one thing is interesting that I've anticipated to do some go to first slide, go to last slide, go to end slide, and I didn't wire them in any other controller, but anyway, it could have been sent and just not catched. That's the magic of the components. Uh, slide counter. Slide counter could have been a graphical component, but the template was ridiculously simple, so it's using simply adding some we're here. So if you're interested in using it or contributing, I'm here and available for your questions. Thank you.